figure I get fired from 30
I
to
didn't
8
realize
years
the
of
time.
Make the front page of the paper because they're swearing in.
Well,
Check
it's not
on
done, so that's funny.
He said he just pulled it.
Oh, okay, good.
Take it.
From when you have two simultaneous
And
things
you want me
going.
to send
John,
it?
do you accept credit cards?
I didn't think.
You accept credit cards?
Across the road, across Kaiser Road.
Online,
Maybe.
yes.
We'll have
Yeah, I'll
to.
make taxes.
I would.
Pay your taxes, but the fee for paying your taxes is a percentage of the balance owed. So it can be steep.
Bring cash.
We're live, so.
Oh,
sure.
It's not mine.
So YouTube is feeding live right at the moment. It's just an FYI to make sure to turn off the ringers for your phones.
It's for one of my constituents.
There's Mr. Helper.
Constituents.
Oh, Your Honor. Judge Roars,
Yes, sir.
are you ready to get down to business? Because you're up first.
No, this is the way I address all the time. You're actually good.
I'm not walking that way.
Going out there so he can face.
You're right up here for that.
face that way. Okay. So, you raise your right hand. I, David M. McMaster,
I, David M. McMaster,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support
that I will support
the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and the Charter
and the Charter
and ordinances
and ordinances
of the City of Defiance.
of the City of Defiance.
I shall not be influenced
I shall not be influenced
by any consideration
by any consideration
except that of merit
except that of merit
and fitness
and fitness
in the appointment
in the appointment
or discharge
or discharge
of employees.
of employees.
I shall not make
I shall not make
or authorize
or authorize
the expenditure of public money
the expenditure of public money
otherwise than for adequate consideration
for adequate consideration
and efficient service
and efficient service
to the City of Defiance.
to the City of Defiance.
I shall preside
I shall preside
over all public proceedings
over all public proceedings
of the council
of the council
impartially
impartially
and ensure
and ensure
that competing views
that competing views
on issues of public importance
on issues of public importance
are fully
are fully
and fairly presented
and fairly presented
in the orderly conduct
in the orderly conduct
of the city's
of the city's
legislative affairs.
legislative affairs.
And I shall,
And I shall,
in all other respects,
in all other respects,
faithfully discharge
faithfully discharge
the duties
the duties
incumbent upon me
incumbent upon me
as President
as President
of the City Council
of the City Council
of the City of Defiance, Ohio.
of the City of Defiance, Ohio.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you, sir.
Okay, that's yours. There you go.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
That's yours.
Okay, so the three at-large members of council. Pretty risky. Mr. Lynch, Mr. Wexler. You'll all raise your right hand. I state your name.
I, State Reg,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support
that I will support
the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and the Charter
and the Charter
and ordinances
and ordinances
of the City of Defiance.
of the City of Defiance.
I shall not be influenced
I shall not be influenced
by any consideration
by any consideration
except that of merit
except that of merit
and fitness
and fitness
in the appointment or discharge of employees. I shall not make or authorize the expenditure of public money otherwise than for adequate consideration and efficient service to the city of Defiance. And I shall, in all other respects, faithfully discharge the duties incumbent upon me as a member of the City Council of the City of Defiance, Ohio. So help me God.
That's good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Roars. Good evening and welcome to the Defiance City Council meeting for tonight, January 4th, 2022. As always, before we get underway, we have a local pastor come and open us up in prayer. Tonight we have Pastor Dave Brobston to open us up in prayer. Thanks for being our guest this evening.
Thanks for having me. If I'd have known it was formal, I'd have brought my robes. Would you pray with me? Almighty God, you are the God of our yesterdays, our todays, and tomorrows. For us in this city and on this council, it's a time of transition. But for you, nothing ever changes. You look down upon us with your love. You guide us with your strength. You inspire us with the movement of your spirit. In the midst of these changes in our lives and our world, continue to be with us, to guide these men and women as they administer to this community. Guide them in their decisions, in their deliberations. Be with them and their families as they carry out your will. We pray that you be with us throughout this new year, that you guide us, that you strengthen us, and that your holy angels have watch over us, that the evil one have no power. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Let the record show that all members of council are present this evening. Would you stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As is the beginning of a new calendar year and term, one of my responsibilities is to assign council members to the different liaison committees. This year, this time around, Joe Uresti will be the head of the Buildings and Land Liaison Committee, Chris Engel, Economic Development, John Hancock, Finance and Budget, Jill Crutch, the Police and Fire, Public Relations is Josh Mast, Steve Corbett, Public Utilities, Gas and Lights, as well as Sewer and Sanitation, Josh Mast is Street and Sidewalks, and Steve Waxler, the Waterworks Liaison Committee. As usual, the at-large members, Steve Waxler, Joe Uresti, and Jill Crutch are on the Traffic Commission. Also, at the beginning of the new term, we take motions and seconds and vote on the position for pro tem. Do we have a motion this evening for that? Mrs. Crutch.
I make a motion for Steve Corbett as president pro tem.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second? Second. Mr. Engel seconds. Okay. All those in favor of Steve Corbett as pro tem, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Corbett. This evening, we have a guest for a public hearing. Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our planning and zoning code has a process for making changes to the land use plan that we have throughout the city. And it sets forth the process in really two forms. The first is when you are changing the use of a particular parcel of land, the use code from one zone to another, and that's called a map amendment, and that's what we're here for tonight. The second is when you're changing the text itself of the zoning code, and that's what our code calls a text amendment. And both of those require public hearings and before council, so that members of the public can come here and voice their opinions on the proposed change of the land use. The use for tonight is listed in the agenda in the east half of the southwest corner, section 14, Town 4 North, Range 4 East, Noble Township, Defiance County, Ohio. The applicant is asking to change that zoning use from the OR, Office Residential, to a B3 Highway and General Business District. This applicant did attend the November Planning Commission, I believe, and the Planning Commission recommended your approval of that change. And in the next few weeks, we will have an ordinance for you to vote that up or down.
Do we have any questions, any comments from council? Apparently not. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Reviewed the index minutes for the city council meeting for December 14th, 2021. Do we have a motion to correct or amend the index minutes as presented? Without any, I'll approve them. Do we have any questions or comments from council? Mr. Corbett.
I know I've done this personally, but I'd like to officially extend our welcome to Ryan for his new position, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's been great so far.
Mr. Waxler.
I also would like to welcome you, Ryan. And I've had several phone calls on the Spectrum. A lot of phone calls on the Spectrum. We're really complaining because their TVs just keep going into buffering. And I know mine does. And I hear my wife say, go unplug this and plug it in. I keep doing it, don't work. Everybody wants to know why we don't have another choice besides Spectrum. And I know we've talked about this in the past. I don't know what we can do about it, but I think it's probably getting time to look, you know.
Well, I will tell you what our our meetings and conferences and conversations with Spectrum have been. And I believe I've said this before, Mr. Waxler and all of you, because I know you all hear it. We all hear it. They have assured us, and I'm not a Spectrum customer, so I can't say, but they've assured us that if you call in and express your concerns, that starts a paper trail, and they will go to work on your concerns. And what you're talking about is, just a slowness in service where people are maybe paying for 40 megs, 80 megs, 100 megs, whatever, and getting a fraction of that. You call in, it starts a work order, creates a paper trail. If things don't improve, then you call again. And I know that can get to be a pain, Mr. Waxler, and you say I'm paying for this service, I should get it. But this is what they've told us is the solution. As far as the city of Defiance just doesn't go out and start a cable service. It just doesn't work that way. It's a private sector thing. As I said, I don't have Spectrum, but we have TV in our home through a online service that works fine. I think our kids use YouTube TV or something such as that. So there are other options besides Spectrum. Now, for internet service, it can be spotty as well. And I've dealt with some individuals, I think it was you, Mr. Corbett, that referred a couple folks to us, and we discussed their concerns. I believe that Spectrum is trying to build out their service, and we've all heard this before, that the new infrastructure bill may make money available to companies such as Spectrum and other internet providers in and around Defiance to help rectify this, but that doesn't help those folks today. So what I've suggested to people that they follow the Spectrum process through, but few do. And the ones out south in Huffman Edition, Mr. Corbett, that we've spoken about specifically, Spectrum admits to having a problem out there, and they've also said that they are looking at the possibility of extending fiber to that neighborhood, which should help rectify that. But it's a problem that on Spectrum that we've heard since I've been mayor, and this, like I say, the city of Defiance is not going to start a cable company.
I know that, but I don't know how you go about trying to, I know like Brian, for instance, has 4 different cable companies. I mean, I don't know who you gotta contact, how we gotta go through that process. Do we advertise? I don't know. I've never messed with it. I just know that there's a lot of unhappy people, and the ones I'm talking about all seem to be on the north side right now. Besides me on Wayne, there's a lot of problems on Wayne. So it's all over. It's not just south.
Have you ever called and?
Yeah, you get to,
have, Mrs.
usually you go through the computer thing and you get all this automated stuff, and I don't even know that you really talk to a real person ever, so.
I think after what they're telling me, Mr. Waxler, and it's been probably 6 months since I met with them last, was that there comes a point where you'll get much better personal service. The folks in Huffman Edition raved about the technicians that come out to their house and how pleasant they are and how they want to help.
Yeah, they're good people, but their service isn't very good. I don't know if there's too many on just Spectrum being the only ones here. I mean, I know that the United Phone Company or something, I know there's phone companies that have internet also available. But people are just very upset with Spectrum, and I mean, there's a lot of people wanting to know why we can't look at another option, I guess is the question.
Mr. Waxler, and this is not really in the short term, I think it's more in the long run. Connectivity has been a bigger and bigger issue as we move forward in 22 and in 23 and beyond. The city has worked in trying to take inventory of just what the connectivity piece is, which is really critical. It's like taking inventory of who's got what service, how much power do they have, how much upload, download speeds do they have. And where most people don't realize, they don't know enough to ask the right questions, and it becomes an educational piece as well. Ryan can speak to what the county is doing and in the process of doing as far as putting out studies to see exactly where that connectivity is and where it needs to be addressed. And I think that includes the city of Defiance as well. So there are things that can be done, and as we move forward, I'm one of those people that have been very frustrated with internet connection and Spectrum, and I go out and I think I'm buying higher speeds, and I'm not really getting my money's worth. And the reason I'm not getting my money's worth is how many devices do I have connected in my house? Okay, what are they doing? Who has what? And where is it coming from? And I think those are questions that I think this study will help with a little bit. So you might want to talk a little bit about what the county is entertaining and putting out as far as taking a look at Defiance County as a whole.
Yeah, so before I left the county, they opened a bid for a county-wide internet connectivity study. I believe the only applicant was a company called Lit Communities. And the goal of bringing somebody like that in is it brings all of the communities, the villages, the townships, the city together, puts out this study information to all of our residents and asks them what type of speeds they are getting at home, what type of speeds they'd be willing to pay for, and where the real needs and unserved and underserved areas are of our community. And then from there, work on a plan to actually extend fiber or towers or whatever it takes to get better connectivity to those homes. So it'll give the government kind of a better idea of how much something like that would cost. And then you can go out and talk to some of the companies and see who's willing to fill those roles, to take that up and serve our constituents, our residents better. So it's a process. And as I said, when I left the county, they had just opened up the lit community. So I think they're still probably negotiating with them to get that on the board. But it's all part of the process to get everybody involved.
Mr. O'Donnell?
And Mr. President, I would just add, thanks to the council and some of the legislation that they approved about 2 months ago, we do have 2 additional telecommunications towers that will be going up. And Mr. Mack talked about both fiber and other types of internet service providers, in particular like 5G. That may help with that as well in terms of options. We can't tell you, your constituents, go with this provider, don't go with that provider, but at least at that point, they would have options.
Yeah, I just wanted, my question is to ask because I'm being called and they needed
I
something
think more and more
answered.
information will come out as far as where the connectivity is failing and lacking and where you have higher speeds. And I think that study will bring a lot to the forefront.
Mr. Ritchie?
Yes, I'd ask, it's probably been 15 years ago over by Archibald, to have them come to the city of Defiance. It was next door to Archibald. They said they couldn't afford to do it. Back then, it was over $1 million because they'd have to have their own fiber. And the whole thing, it just wouldn't be cost worthy for them to come over. And now that's probably $4 or $5 million or more. So that's one reason we probably can't get it because of that, so.
Mrs. Crutch?
To kind of piggyback, I've also received calls, but I think the frustrating part for people is that when they do call the number, it's not directly to the Defiance office, it's the big overall spectrum. And so you have to push a lot of buttons to get the people that you need to discuss. And I think that's the frustrating part for a lot of people. I know it was for me. I've done the paper trail. I have called and called and called. They probably hate seeing my number come up. But, it's frustrating to see it buffering during the show that I really want to watch. But, so just to kind of piggyback off and welcome Mr. Mack also. The other thing is that I have been on the board of Defiance Community Cultural Council for the last 4 years, and I am willing to continue on that unless there's someone else that would like to be on the board as the representative from the Defiance City Council.
So if someone had an interest, they should contact you?
No, you have to do that here. I'm not sure.
Okay.
They have to do it here, so I'm willing to stay on the board for the Cultural Council, but I didn't know if there was anybody else that wanted to do it for the next 4 years.
Right. Or if they had questions about responsibilities, time
Yeah, it's
management.
once a month, Mondays, usually at 5 o'clock is usually when the meetings are.
All right.
And it's at the Strady Center.
Congratulations.
Do we need a nomination of reappoint her to the board? I'll make that nomination.
I'll second it.
I will gladly do it.
All in favor of Mrs. Crutch being appointed to the board, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Congratulations, Mrs. Crutch.
Thank you. And then there was one other thing. Oh, I received an email from a woman who lives over by the railroad tracks, kind of ravine area, and she was wondering about a quiet zone area. And I know we've talked about this before because, I live on Wayne and I hear the trains all the time. And at Christmas time, it's really nice when they try to do jingle bells, which is really annoying. But she was just wondering how she would go about trying to get a quiet zone in that area.
Jeffrey? Oh, really?
We're all looking at you, Sean.
So the agency that determines that is a federal agency, the Federal Railroad Administration. And I know we had some correspondence yesterday or today, Mrs. Crutch. But the actual entity that has to apply for that would be the local government, in this case, the city. And it's not a sure thing, and it would require elected officials here making trade-offs between safety on the one hand and noise reduction. So it's something that we could look at pursuing. and may require some legislation from you if we decide to pursue that as a city. But I don't want to give her false hope that it's a sure thing or it's just something that the city officials can approve.
So they basically have to look at the crossovers to see the crosswalks, if there's arms or whatever, et cetera.
They
Is that
may
what you're
want
saying?
us to close some of those access points down.
Either close
Okay.
crossings
Right.
or at city expense, you put up the gates and the lights and all
Right.
that.
The railroads don't do the expense there?
No, it's all on the applicant.
Oh, it's on the applicant. Okay,
And that's the challenge.
all right, thank you. I can get back with her and give her some information. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hancock?
Just wanted to ask, along with the topic of the railroad, is it feasible that we could have someone look at, Riverside sidewalks as well as Jefferson sidewalks? I've spoken to some people that are out and about walking, and the conditions of those, may need some attention. I'm not sure if that falls under the city's responsibility or the railroad's responsibility.
Do you want them fixed?
I'm sorry?
Do you want them fixed?
Railroad would be, or I'm sorry, Riverside would be nice.
I'm just
Jefferson
saying, if
would
you
be
want them
even better.
fixed, it would have to be something we would undertake.
Okay, I'm just, yeah. Take a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from council? Mr. Mast?
Just to bounce back to the cable thing briefly, I think a lot of what the confusion is for people is they seem to think that we, as a city, contracted one cable company and that's all that they can have. I think that's, seems to be a belief people have. They think we're keeping other cable companies out. Why don't we have more choices? I guess they don't understand a lot of times that they just don't come here. They could come here. They're more than welcome to come. That's one thing, but I think
There was a time when the city, municipalities actually held the franchise agreements with the cable companies. And we actually did have some say, whatever that may have been. But that's just simply no longer the case. All those agreements are through the state of Ohio now, and the local governments, really our hands are tied in that regard. Sorry to cut you off.
no, that's fine. I was just gonna say another thing to consider for most people is check your own infrastructure first and definitely call and request a tech to come out because they'll come out and they'll help you. They'll go through your stuff, check your cable lines, check your connectors. I've had 90 connectors at the wall that were bad and caused big issues. So, you gotta check your own stuff too. Just as a note.
Good point. Thank you. Are there any other comments from council? On my desk today, I do have a new liquor license application from Dark Horse Social Club LLC at 651 Clinton Street, Defiance, Ohio. Is there a motion to request a hearing on this issue?
Where's that located at?
It's Rod Brown Studio.
Rod Brown
okay.
Studio, yeah. All right, thank you. Mayor McCann.
Just welcome back to our at-large members and you, Mr. President, and I'll officially welcome Ryan on board here. He's certainly hit the ground running and he's a sponge. He's soaking up a lot of stuff and if a gathering of information grows hairy, he should have a full head by the end of the month. And that's really all I have, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Leonard.
I have nothing tonight.
Mr. O'Donnell.
I have nothing at this time.
Oh. And Mr. Leonard.
One thing, since the topic of spectrum seems to be the hot topic of the night, little update on what's happening in this room. A few weeks ago, the city undertook a project to kind of a major plumbing project to correct some sewer issues in this building. And in the course of that project, the direct cable that we had installed maybe a year ago for this room got clipped when we were boring underneath the building from the back parking lot to the front parking lot. So that's why last week we didn't have a live broadcast. our last meeting. We do have live YouTube tonight. What we don't have tonight is internet service in the room for your devices. Two things. We will try and address that, although we did get so that we could have the live broadcast tonight. We will try and address the internal, and all while we're waiting for Spectrum to, and I'm not trying to pile on Spectrum, this is not their problem, this is our fault, but so when they can come out and re-bore a new line, they need the equipment to do that, and we called them immediately after our last meeting. We're waiting for that to be scheduled. Keep you posted.
Thanks for the update. And this evening, we do have 4 items of legislation for consideration. Would you read the caption for the first one, Ms. Elders?
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing the city administrator to enter into a lease agreement for the surplus agricultural land adjacent to the water pollution control plant.
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. President. This piece of legislation, as well as the 4th piece of legislation, actually deals with a lease program for farming that the city has put out to bid. The city opened bids on December 14th. The winning bidder in this case for the first piece of legislation was a company or person, Thiessen, for an amount of $5,550 for cash rent. And we have an agreement for 3 years that we're looking at with possible extensions if we want to in the near future. But this piece of legislation, we've actually put out to bid for land out at the water pollution control, that farm field that you see out there. The 4th piece of legislation will come in the way of property that we own by the reservoir site. And with that, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Leonard?
I just want to compliment, I think that's a good rate.
Thank you.
We're looking at about 150 to 152 an acre, which is reasonable.
Mr. Corbett?
There's no further questions, motion to suspend and calls.
We have no other questions. Motion to suspend and call. Second. Telemarketer. Mr. Mast?
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
And Mr. Mast?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Motion done.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
Second. Mr. Hancock?
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Mast?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
And Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
This ordinance is adopted. Second up.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing the law director to execute the participation agreement for a settlement with Johnson & Johnson and declare an emergency.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Council may recall last fall electing to participate in what was called the One Ohio opioid litigation settlement. And that was with 3 opioid prescription drug distributors in lieu of proceeding with a lawsuit in their role over the opioid crisis. The Ohio Attorney General and a group of plaintiffs are now proposing to form a new settlement agreement with this time a producer, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, whose parent company is Johnson & Johnson, the baby shampoo company that I use. I guess one qualification I want to make is we're not demonizing here the drugs themselves. They have some medically beneficial uses, or some of the doctors that use them to the benefit of their patients. But you have to understand there are really 3 types of doctors and that prescribe these medications. Doctor number one recognizes the positive uses and the potentials for some of these medications in their patients, and they prescribe them responsibly. Doctor number two gets an offer to work at what's called a pain management clinic, and those are usually in the back of like a dying strip mall next to a loading dock, and arrives on the first day and says, so this is kind of shady, I'm out of here. And then finally, doctor number three walks into that same pain management clinic and says, well, this place, if you squint really hard, looks like a medical facility, and I have to pay for my daughter's tuition at Case Western, so I'll just work here for a couple weeks and make those payments. And the key difference here in these doctors is doctors number one and two end up testifying against doctor number three in his criminal trial. So I say this because there were certainly bad actors, like really bad actors, and they're facing criminal liability. They have faced criminal liability. Some of them are in prison. But there were also producers and suppliers that enabled these people to write and sometimes overprescribe and sometimes issue outright fraudulent prescriptions. And some of these producers and distributors are facing civil liability. And these are based on just some numbers, very brief. You've probably seen it in the news. Just last year, it came out in November, from April 20 to April 2021, the CDC recorded over 100,000 overdose deaths from opioids. But going back to 2011, opioid producers, all of them collectively, not just Johnson & Johnson, but all of them spent over $14 million for advertisements in leading medical journals, with the idea that doctors would obviously see those. Some physicians received six-figure sums for endorsing, certain medications. They spoke at medical conferences, and some were convicted of prescribing these medications to their patients in return for this compensation. And then I think most notably, Johnson & Johnson provided more than 60% of the active ingredients in the opioids that you hear about. The Sackler family company comes to mind. So I say this because it's not just I just want to make clear, it's not just an ambulance chasing level lawsuit. I mean, the tobacco companies, you may recall in the 1990s, were held liable for much less than this. And I'm a North Carolina native, so I get to complain about that. But it appears the companies just like the distributors that you saw earlier, they just didn't ask why, for instance, the state of West Virginia received the equivalent of 433 hydrocodone and oxycodone pills per person. It was easily trackable. They certainly noticed it in their profit margins. So what we have here before you is a proposed $5 billion multi-state settlement that acts as a general release of Johnson & Johnson and Janssen Pharmaceuticals of further civil liability, I should say, and further litigation. And so neither company or parent company has to admit wrongdoing. This is 190 pages, so I'm trying to give you the cliff notes. But the settlement would ensure that the state and its local governments are able to receive some of these funds. I'm going to give you this number, but it's almost certainly going to change our share, City of Defiance, $132,700 in direct payments, and then there's going to be other payments in terms of like a grant program for drug treatment and so forth in the next decade. Commissioner Mack, or I guess now our in-house county commissioner, former county commissioner consultant Mack, approved a similar resolution last month, and your approval would enable me to sign on to this settlement on your behalf as well. So thanks again. It was a 190-page settlement. I didn't want to give you the whole thing.
Nicely condensed.
That's it.
But do we have any questions for Mr. O'Donnell? Mr. Waxler?
No questions, move suspending call.
We have no questions. Motion to suspend and call.
Second, sir.
Second, Mr. Corbett.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
And Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Mast?
Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt. Second, Mrs. Crutch.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
And Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
And this ordinance is adopted.
First reading by caption only. An ordinance awarding a contract for the City of Defiance, Ohio Comprehensive Plan.
Mr. Leonard.
Yes, thank you. One of the items that we discussed in the capital budget when we were considering the 2022 budget was the preparation of a comprehensive plan, a long-term comprehensive plan for the city. We included $150,000 in the budget for that purpose. The plan will be directed at establishing goals and means of improving economic growth, infrastructure needs, quality of life projects, and integral to the whole thing will be an update to our current planning and zoning code, which for some people, including our law director, is maybe the most important aspect of the whole project. But engineering department went out for a request for qualifications and is recommending that we hire a consultant by the name of Reveille in the amount of $149,500.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. Leonard? Mr. Rusty?
Does it give you a projected timeline for if this is approved, how long it would take for this to get the base put together so that we can go from there?
If there's an answer, I'm going to have to defer to someone else. I don't know the answer to that timeline question, Mr. Uresti. Apologize.
It will be the third quarter of this year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mrs. Crutch?
Will this comprehensive plan work side by side with the strategic planning group that we have already in place?
Yes, but believe it or not, we're near the end of the term of that strategic plan. It won't replace that because they are two different documents.
Right.
As Mr. Leonard mentioned, one of the key points to this will be an update and we hope a simplification of our planning and zoning code.
It will also help with additional grants out there for other purposes. For example, we talked about connectivity. That connectivity piece should be in this comprehensive plan about those items and those things we want to focus on in terms of connecting the city of Defiance to the internet and the global arena. So that comprehensive plan can assist in economic development concepts out there that are, as long as we address them within the comprehensive plan. Comprehensive meaning sort of this wide, broad approach and making sure that we have an overall strategy for the city and where we'd like to see it go. Connectivity is without question going to be a key component to that.
Do we have any other questions for Mr. Leonard? Mr. Corbett?
There's no further questions. Motion to suspend and call, sir.
Motion to suspend and call?
Second.
Second, Mr. Mast?
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
And Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Motion to adopt?
Motion to adopt, Mr. Engel?
Second.
Second, Mr. Mast?
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
And Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
This ordinance is also adopted. And lastly,
An ordinance first reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing the city administrator to enter into a lease agreement for the surplus agriculture land adjacent to the municipal reservoir.
Mr. Leonard.
This is the second lease agreement I spoke of. This is a 3-year agreement. This encompasses 98.9 acres around the reservoir site that we have. Again, this is a 3-year agreement and it starts in I believe, February. And the amount in the winning bid was Singer Farms LLC in the amount of $15,000.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Leonard? Mrs. Crutch?
No further questions, motion to suspend the call.
Motion to suspend and call, Mrs. Crutch.
Second.
Second, Mr. Corbett.
Mrs. Crutch.
Yes.
Mr. Engel.
Yes.
Mr. Wexler.
Yes.
Mr. Corbett.
Yes.
Mr. Hancock.
Yes.
Mr. Mass.
Yes.
Mr. Rusty.
Yes.
Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Hancock.
Second.
Mr. Mass.
Mr. Corbett.
Yes.
Mr. Hancock.
Yes.
Mr. Mass.
Yes.
Mr. Wexler.
Yes.
Mr. Rusty.
Yes.
Mr. Engel.
Yes.
And Mrs. Crutch.
Yes.
And lastly, this ordinance is adopted. Before we adjourn for the evening, do we have any citizens' concerns? Or did any of you receive any emails you wanted to read in regards to citizens' concerns? Without any, do we have a motion to adjourn for tonight? So moved.
Second.
Second, Mr. Hancock. All those in favor of adjourning for this evening, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We're adjourned for this evening. We'll see you next Tuesday.